But why is it that you have all these evangelicals that don't seem to support that at all? They're so indifferent to Muslim lives on the other side of the world.
I'm going to push back on you.
Tell me all your thoughts on God, 'cause I really like to meet her.
Hello, welcome to the Left Shew Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Shew, and with me today is my co-host, Michael Malloy. Mr. Malloy, how are you, sir?
Good morning, Rick.
So Jeremy is actually not with us today, but no one think that's weird. He's actually working on something on his own for Left Shew, and I'm, as just a fan of Jeremy, I'm very excited, and quite honestly, I don't even know what it is. Michael, do you?
I have not heard, no.
No, he just said, look, I'm actually knee-deep in working on something, and I think he may be doing it today. I don't know.
I think he was feeding starving children on the streets of Los Angeles.
I wouldn't be
Been down there to
surprised,
skid around.
actually, with Jeremy. But so he's not with us today, but just know that he's got something up his sleeve, and it's going to be awesome, as we know. Today, I am actually very excited about this podcast. I've been talking about this for months. There's a lot going on in real time today, especially with Trump's tweet storms that I'm kind of itching to get to, but I don't want to get distracted. I want to focus on the topic at hand, and we're going to talk about religion. And it sounds very broad, and it is, but we're going to hone in on some specific things. And really, at the end of the day, what I want to have is just a great conversation about the role of religion in government and some other things. And so without further ado, we'll get to that. But let me introduce our guest. So we have our returning guest, who is my good friend, Zaki Hassan, who's a professor of communications and media studies. He's co-founder of Mr. Boy Productions and a Huffington Post film critic. He's my personal favorite film critic over there, by the way. My pal, Zaki. Zaki, how are you, sir?
Good morning. How's it going?
You have a little bit of a cold. You set off mic.
I'm fighting through it. This is how dedicated I am, though. I downed some Robitussin and some ginseng tea and sitting here ready to go.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, and I know it's still, even though it's not 7 a.m. like it was last time you did this for us. I know it's still early, but you're in San Francisco, and I am in Texas. So, Zaki, do me a favor, man. Plug what's going on with you. Now, I know you had the Logan podcast. Maybe I just kind of stepped on your feet on that, and I can't wait to hear it. But what do you want to talk about that or anything else you have going on?
Yeah, I guess that's as good a thing as any. Yeah, Logan just opened yesterday, and we recorded a special episode of the show Thursday night, so just after the first previews. And gave our analyses of it, and it's myself, my co-host Brian Holland. We were joined by Justin Shanlin of the Shanlin on Batman podcast, and we had a really fun conversation. We also talked about the Oscars, and we gave our remembrances of the late great Bill Paxton.
Bill Paxton, R.I.P. Man, he was great. Very cool. I can't wait to. Like I told you on Facebook, I haven't listened to it yet. I haven't even read your review yet because I'm going to be a little late seeing Logan. That'll be next week, and so I don't want to have any spoilers. But just as a grade, where did you put it?
I would go B+. B+, which is on the lower end from what I'm seeing. I think in terms of the majority of critics, I liked it. I wasn't in love with it like a lot of people, but I would absolutely recommend it.
Awesome. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
All right, we have a special guest as well, Mr. Philip Larsen. He and I have been talking forever to do this. He's a dear friend, pastor up in Oklahoma City. I say up because I am in Dallas. He also co-hosts a weekly show called Ryan and Philip's Conversation Rules, which is carried live every Monday on 91online.com. Philip is also an author, and his next book, The Scandalous Beauty of Grace, will be coming out later this year. Philip, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rick. It's good to finally be on here.
You know, Philip, it's really great to have you, and I must say I want to thank you on the air because your father is such a big supporter of Left Shew Politics. And,
yeah,
and so, Zaki, I don't know if you've ever seen Kent Larsen's comments over. He likes to give us a hard time. That's actually Philip's dad on the Facebook page. And
how funny!
He is a firecracker.
He's something else, isn't he? No,
I genuinely like the man. And if anybody says we're afraid to argue with anybody, they need to go in and see the conversations between your dad and I.
Oh, they're worth the price of admission. That's for sure.
So, gentlemen, we're all here to discuss religion, and what I thought I would start off with is religion and politics, particularly in real time. As we all know, Donald Trump is our 45th president in the United States. He won.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
He won last November with the biggest electoral slide ever. I mean, it was huge. It was bigger than since FDR. But one thing that I found interesting when you look at when you dig deep in the people that voted for him and how he was able to pull off his victory, he had the largest white evangelical vote since Bush in 2004, and even more so than Bush had. Over 80% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. A small portion of them voted third party. I think she received like 13% or something like that, but still close to 81% belongs to him. I'm trying to reconcile a twice-divorced, vagina-grabbing narcissist that has been on record saying that I don't need to ask for forgiveness for God. I'm trying to reconcile this in my head, how that's possible. And Zacchaeus, I wanted to start with you, if you don't mind. What are your just general thoughts on that? How did he pull that off?
I don't know, to be to be honest. I mean, I don't know. Religion is not one size fits all, and I think people of whatever religious persuasion, it's like anybody else. You're going to say, well, I don't agree with this person about X, Y, and Z, but I do agree with them on A, B, and C. So I'll ignore X, Y, and Z, and I'll support them because of A, B, and C. And that's not exclusively a religious framework. That's any kind of a partisan framework. And I would assume that's what it came down to, is something as simple as, well, the things that Hillary Clinton supports, we are for sure against in terms of whatever specific areas. But Donald Trump has made noises in support of positions that we are more comfortable with. So therefore, we can ignore this other aspect. I mean, I can only assume. I mean, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance that's involved in any kind of politicking and any kind of giving support to any candidate. So I would assume that's what came into play.
That, look, those are all valid points, and I am not going to pretend like I can crawl into their heads and tell you why, but I just feel like, at least what I saw on the news, that it wasn't just that they voted for him. It was thunderous. It was enthusiastic. So, Philip, help me out here. Why is that? As a pastor, if you don't mind,
So the first thing we have to realize is that the guys that show up on the news, such as your Robert Jeffersons and your Jerry Falwells, and even to a lesser extent the Jack Grahams and the Richard Lands, and those guys, those are for the most part the outliers. So we really need to define what it is exactly, support is, because I can tell you, I'm in Oklahoma, which is bright red, glow in the dark red. I mean, exactly. In the last three presidentials, no county has gone blue, and that's the only state that can claim that. So we have that going for us, which is nice, I suppose. Everyone I know and most of the people I follow, it wasn't necessarily a breathless and enthusiastic support of Trump, because I mean, we all see the same things you guys do, that he is morally ambivalent, that his rhetoric is shaking my head facepalm. His stances seem to be changed with the political wind. He made his fortune off of the backs of the poor, most notably through gambling, which most evangelicals aren't necessarily excited about that because it's incredibly exploitative. First, we have to decide, what does support define? And support by the vote is a little bit of a tricky thing, because people vote for a number of different reasons. So looking at the evangelicals that I know, and even the 80%, I view that less as a support of Donald Trump and more actually of a repudiation of Hillary Clinton. And here's why I say that, is that it should come as no shock of what some of the most important things for evangelicals is. And probably on top of the list is the issue of abortion. I know online, you and I, Rick and Michael and everyone have had this conversation, but the Democrats' party platform has been described, and I haven't seen repudiated, as the most liberal on abortion in history. And
is it more liberal than Israel? I know that's a loaded response.
Well, I mean, bringing Israel is somewhat of a little bit of a red herring to this conversation, because we're talking about why would evangelicals necessarily vote for Trump in lieu of instead of Hillary.
I understand, but you're talking about abortion, yet their full throttle support of Israel. They seem to never even bring up the fact that they have the most progressive views on abortion anywhere probably on the planet. Be
that as it may, there isn't a evangelical support for abortion. The president of NARAL, her name escapes me, her primetime speech where she in essence spoke fondly of her own abortion experience. Look, I'm probably, I've got enough red meat to have both liberals and conservatives hate me on this, because I hate abortion. I think that it is a plague on our society, and that I believe that life begins at conception. But I also am not one that is advocating for necessarily the repealing of Roe v. Wade, because I think it will result in more abortions. But be that as it may, looking at that NARAL speech and then the campaign of Shout Your Abortion, the weeks leading up to the campaign, as someone who's even sensitive to Democratic policies, that made me sick to my stomach. And so when you take that and you look at the evangelicals who voted for Trump, it was not a vote for Trump. It was a vote against this ideology and this almost celebrating something that we find appalling.
Is abortion, and obviously we have to be real careful because we'll move off into abortion, and that's like 2 or 3 shows, always the entire conversation.
And I refuse to do that without a female on the panel, by the way, just FYI.
The topic of abortion, does it supersede any other value decision, like for an evangelical? Even like kind of like what you're saying right now. So you're an evangelical that recognizes whether you love abortion or you hate abortion or wherever you fall kind of in between, you recognize that not having them legal could actually create more abortions and more damage to women and to society. How is it that evangelicals have come to a certain conclusion that, and I've thought this for a long time too, and I agree with you, abortion they make tantamount, but all the other policies that seem to go with the modern day American conservative agenda are very much against most of the tenets of the Bible. Why does that one thing 100%, it just seems like it absolutely supersedes everything for the conservative, for the evangelical base?
So let's look at the statistics for a second. So the last 2 years, we've seen the least amount of abortions since up to and including the passing of Roe in 1973. And so if you're a person that is like me, is pro-life, you on one hand celebrate that, because I am of the mind that less abortions the better. That life, from conception is sacred. We call it in my camp womb to tomb coherent, comprehensive pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
That includes for me at least abortion. That includes social safety net things for people who are falling on hard time. I view that as a pro-life issue. I view, caring for the indigent a pro-life issue. This should tickle your liberal, sensibilities. I'm against the death penalty, but I'm also against assisted suicide. So
let me just say this. One thing I will say about you is that I very much disagree with you on the position of abortion. However, you are consistent. And I love that about you. I mean, you're the real deal, and you walk and talk it. But I don't want us to get too much just on abortion, though. So if you don't mind, let's finish this thought, and then I want to try to transition.
Let me finish this thought. So like I said, I mean, the least amount of abortions in last year, and that was still at 700,000. And so if you're a person that believes that life begins at conception, and that the life that is being aborted is tantamount to the life being destroyed, 700,000, I mean, that, in the evangelical mind is equitable to the Holocaust. I mean, 700,000 lives that are removed. Getting into the mind of the evangelical is that they view that as not, a policy or anything like that. They view it as a man-made tragedy. And so for the campaign and the DNC to almost take a cavalier and celebratory tone towards the idea of abortion, especially in their infomercial at the DNC, even given Trump's mountains and mountains of problems that a lot of evangelicals have and should have, this they view as an existential threat.
Yeah, but at the same time, this is also a guy that was pro-choice 3 weeks ago. But let's move on from abortion. I guess at the end of the day, my point is this, or if I even have a point here, I'm just trying to figure out, when we talk about religion and politics and what role does it play, and that's something we'll kind of get into here in just a few minutes, but I wanted to start with this for a reason, because obviously this guy's the sitting president, and he won these votes overwhelmingly. A narcissist, a twice-divorced guy that was literally pro-choice 2 years ago, to be exact, not to make an exaggeration, 2 years ago, and he has been through the 80s and 90s. He always has been. It's just, it raises eyebrows. Now, if we don't mind, let's transition here, because I just wanted to get the pulse of you guys on that in terms of what your thoughts are, because to me it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating that this guy could slap an R next to his name, and the next thing you know, people that were small governments and fiscally conservative individuals suddenly love this guy, and he is anything but either one of those. But let's kind of transition to something else here. I would like to talk about the refugee situation. And there's not a good segue to go from anything to this topic, because this topic to me is the humanitarian crisis topic of the decade, perhaps of my lifetime. It is atrocious what is happening. And these poor people are, by no fault of their own, a victim of circumstance, much of which, and if this pisses you off when I say this, and I say you, the listener, whoever, it's the reality of the situation, is that we inadvertently helped create this mess. We, the United States of America. And a lot of it was under the president that I admire the most in my lifetime, which is Obama, because Syria is not in the plus column for Obama. And this has turned into something that is, I can't even get my head wrapped around it. And
Vladimir Putin. At the end of the day, if you're going to mention a root cause, don't forget Vladimir Putin, who seems like the conservatives are falling in love with right now. He's the one that was supporting Assad and contributing towards these attacks and pushing all those people out into Europe, all these things that the conservatives hate. So make sure to mention that.
No, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, we're the inherent good guys. I get that. But we make mistakes, okay? And Syria is not in the Obama plus column, period. Okay? So moving on. So now the question is, what do we do with these individuals? And then how does religion play a role in this? And what I see is so much hatred and vitriol and fear-mongering. And all of it comes down to Islamophobia. All of it. Every single bit of it. That's all this is. Do not let them in because they will cut your kid's head off. Do not let them in because they're going to blow up a mall. Don't let them in because they're going to hijack an airplane. It disgusts me, okay? So from a religious standpoint, Zachy, let me ask you, how is it that one can claim to be religious? And when I say religious, it can be Christian, it can be Muslim, it can be Jewish, it can be really anything. How can you in the same breath say that and then be against refugees? And it doesn't mean that you're against vetting and being responsible, but just saying no. How is that? How is that possible?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, to buy into the framing require the administration's framing, which is number one. Oh, people are just streaming across the border. It's open season, which is demonstrably untrue because the vetting process that we have is already extreme. That's number one. So it's an outright falsehood. But number two, this notion of, if we let them in, them, quote unquote, it's a Trojan horse situation, and you just wait. Them, they're going to turn against us. They're going to do, they're going to be raping our women, and they're going to be, cutting our heads off, and all the horrible memes and everything else that are out there. It requires a fundamental rejection of what Muslims actually are like. And I'm not even going to say what Islam is actually like because, that's a separate conversation. But it requires you to reject the evidence of people in front of you, just people living their lives, just trying to survive. And what is more basic than that? And to say, no, I reject what I see here, and instead I choose to believe that you are, this is like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something. Mm-hmm. That you're just waiting for the moment for me to show kindness / weakness, and then you're gonna enact some horrible atrocity upon me, right? And we see this linkage of kindness and weakness. That's this administration's agenda. Certainly, that's this president's. That's his persona,
right?
And as far as why so many people are buying into that, I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I truly do believe, though, that at the end of the day, there is a basic sense of decency that does win out. I mean, there was the video footage that we saw last year of that poor little boy in Syria just caked in the debris. You know what I'm talking about, right? He was in the ambulance, just sitting there wiping the blood off his head. And we saw the heartfelt reactions that emerged from people, and ultimately, that's the decency that I almost feel like President Trump is trying to stifle in people.
Is this a Muslim ban, Zachy, that he's proposing, this 7-country travel ban? Is it a Muslim ban?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Of course it is, and I say that because number one, they gave away the game a little bit because Rudy Giuliani's like, President Trump came to me and said, hey, how do I do a Muslim ban without getting in trouble?
Okay, no, he just misspoke. Everybody's just misspeaking all over this administration. That's why they're just contradicting each other. It's so absurd.
Mm-hmm. But beyond that, you look at the people President Trump has surrounded himself with, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, these people have propagated a clash of civilizations narrative that postulates this notion of the quote-unquote West being at war with quote-unquote Islam.
A global war against Islam.
Yeah,
yes,
and this is kind of the Huntingtonian thesis, which has been, it's disproven. I mean, it's not true, except for people who want it to be true. So when we talk about this notion of a global war, you know who wants a global war? The extremist fanatics in ISIS and Stephen Bannon. Mm-mm. So you talk about two peas in a pod,
Right. He is scary to me. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. Steve Bannon scares the living hell out of me. Two people have really scared me in politics in my life. Genuinely scared me. Steve Bannon is one, Dick Cheney's another.
Yeah.
And those two men are frightening to me, both of them.
And Steve Bannon makes you pine for Dick Cheney.
Yes, he absolutely does. Listen, I've said this online, and I'll say it here on the show. It is amazing the frame of reference I have with this administration. I've been watching George Bush do his book tour. I'm like, come back, please come back. I'll give you 3 terms. Just come back. Just get rid of this guy that's in there now. It's quite remarkable. So back in Philip, I'm going to get your thoughts on this as well, but I want to build on it just a little bit. Back in January, Trump told the Christian Broadcasting Network. Now, forgive me, which one is that? Is that Pat Robertson's network?
CBN is Pat Robertson's network.
That is okay. That's what I thought. So, anyway, he said that Christian refugees would get priority over Muslim refugees. This guy actually, the sitting president, actually said this. He cited Christians have been unfairly treated, but quite honestly, that's nonsense. According to a Pew study, first of all, Syria is maybe 10% Christian. In 2016, however, 39,000 Muslims roughly were led into the U.S. that were refugees and 37,000 Christians. So I can't quite get my head wrapped around that math in terms of what he's trying to say. We have a president right now that is saying one religion takes precedence over another. I can't even get my head wrapped around that this man actually said this on live TV, but he did, or maybe it was in an interview, whatever he said it. So Philip, what are your thoughts when you hear that, and not as a Christian, but just as an American, as a humanitarian? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can answer as both because here's the thing: is that the Baptist Church, especially, and then to give you my background, I'm primarily Baptist, but I serve in a Methodist church, and I'm almost ecumenically as far as within Protestant denominationalism, a man without a country. I tend to just make everyone mad and get persona non grata sometimes. But anyways,
good man.
From both a humanitarian and Christian perspective, I'm gonna defer to one of my, I don't know if hero is strong enough for a word, but a gentleman named Russell Moore at the Southern Baptist conference last year in St. Louis answered this somewhat in a roundabout way. This question is that should Christianity get preference over other religions, and the question was framed of why is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention supporting the building of a mosque? I think that was the one in New Jersey, but my memory escapes me. Russell Moore, answered it perfectly, because a government that can deny the building of a mosque can one day deny the building of a church one day. And so in that, if you want me to push back against what Donald Trump said as far as giving preference to Christians, I can't do it. But what I can say is that the refugee crisis has not escaped the church. Both the ERLC, which I previously mentioned, and another organization called the Evangelical Immigration Table has taken it upon themselves to really go to different groups and then even go church by church to share what the reality is, including, Zachy mentioned it a second ago, the extreme nature of the vetting, that it takes 2 years to get for a refugee to be admitted to the United States. And the process has been equated to trying to get top secret clearance to be an intelligence community officer or something like that. So there's a gentleman that has caught my eye and Ryan's eye. In fact, 2 weeks ago on our show, not to shamelessly plug, we interviewed him. His name is Alan Cross. It's episode 48 of my podcast, Immigrants and Refugees with Alan Cross. And he's spent, before that, 5 years primarily on the immigration side of it, talking about what it takes and the processes and the expense to be just to get in line, so to speak, but also talking about the refugee crisis, and has done an incredible job dismantling and dismissing some of the falsehoods that surround this idea of refugees. Because here's the thing, is that me as a pastor and the guys I run with and the guys I follow, whether it be someone from Iran or someone from Oklahoma City, we view these people created in the image of God. And because of that, and because we believe as evangelicals and as Christians, as Scripture teaches us that God favored man above all of his creations, that person who is on the other side of the world, created in the image of God, has value, and it has value that needs to be protected and that needs to be defended. And so what
have you told this to the other 80%, Philip? I mean, these are what you're saying right now. Again, is you're exactly right, and it's perfectly reasonable. It's exactly our position. But why is it that you have all these evangelicals that don't seem to support that at all? They're so indifferent to Muslim lives on the other side of the world.
I'm going to push back on you, because I think, you're trying to equate the 80% that voted for Trump as being tantamount to supporting every policy and policy prescription. I mean, you see quite a bit, even within evangelicals, starting to push back, especially with leadership like Russell Moore, like my friend Alan Cross.
Well, it finally had to get bad enough to go to Donald Trump, and maybe somebody's thinking maybe we should push back. But we don't even have to talk about Trump. We can even talk about the Iraq War, the Bush administration, and just bombing everywhere and so indifferent. How about Ted Cruz, who's arguably one of the most prominent evangelical politicians in the country, alluding to dropping a nuclear bomb to solve the Syrian crisis, right? I don't ever hear anybody from the evangelical side besides yourself. But you are literally the only one I ever see. There's definitely no prominent ones that come out and say those sorts of things. It's you.
Well, it makes me wonder how many of those individuals, the 80% that we keep referring to, support a Muslim ban. I would be really curious to know that. But Philip, go ahead. Because you had a thought.
So I don't know exactly where you want me to start. I mean, if we want to talk about indiscriminate bombing, then we could talk about the Obama drone program. But I think that's another.
But I'm not saying that's not a thing too. I think just from the interest of the conversation that we're having, the thing that challenges us is, I'm sure you know that, like, the thing that bothers me in particular is the idea of equating religion with morality, and that evangelical Christians play very much as if they think they have a higher moral superiority. I mean, you definitely, I can definitely criticize Obama for bombing. I can criticize anyone for bombing. But the things that you are saying, I hear it from no leadership that's evangelical. They just kind of go with the really kind of wild-eyed, uninformed policies of bomb them. We'll just keep bombing, and we'll kick their ass back to the Stone Ages, and that'll teach them a lesson, which obviously is absurd. Well,
as far as the overarching theme, I would agree with you, is absurd. But as far as people speaking out, you brought up Ted Cruz. I know a lot of evangelical leaders, both known and unknown, who spoke out and said that's not only absurd, but is antithetical to Christian values.
So not just like, obviously you're an evangelical, so you're very much in tune with everything, but that everyone else could see, that could help maybe evangelicals sell the message a little bit better. Who's the one that's on the stage that relates, that I could see on national television that would really dismiss him? That's maybe just one pastor that's somebody who's really famous.
The one that gets the most publicity and at a great cost to him was Russell Moore. And he goes on all of the alphabet soup news, agencies and organizations such as CNN, MSNBC, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC. He's brought in, especially last year during the campaign, and was consistent in his repudiation of both Trump, his policies, his actions, his morality, his everything, and it was at some cost to him, as some specifically Robert Jefferson, Jack Graham withheld funding. In fact, currently there's a church in Dallas, Prestonwood, who is escrowing their what's called cooperative program funds and repudiation of it. So I mean, I get it. There are pastors that make me want to change my name and do something else. But there are also those guys like me, guys like Russell Moore, guys like Alan Cross. My friend Ryan, who I co-host the podcast with, is that who are not necessarily voting or supporting candidate and president just because of the letter that's behind his name on the voting registration card.
Zachy, does any of this remind you of where are the Muslims standing up to talk about terrorism and fight against terrorism? Does this kind of sound like the same thing? I'm hearing both in my head. I'm like, this is familiar territory to me.
I've certainly gotten my share of that over the years. Absolutely.
It's and it's funny you get that, and we have a sitting president who has said just as recently as a year ago that Islam hates us, a religion of 1.6 billion people hates us. I don't even know what us means to this day. I guess he means white people. I don't know. But I want to say something about Trump real fast here on this as well, and then I want to get off Trump and kind of shift this conversation a bit. But one last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of talking about the president and religion is I noticed that of all the heinous, atrocious things that he has said about Muslims, banning Muslims, Islam hates us, etc., I did notice in his address to Congress that there was a tonal change. And I'm not one of these people that I'm saying Trump is now presidential because he read from a teleprompter and didn't,
Well, even if you did think that, he divested you of that notion with his Twitter this morning, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, Obama's tapping Trump Tower. Yep, that's the new thing. Nothing to see here, just don't talk about Russia. But in his address to Congress, to give credit where credit is due, I guess, he actually talked about the Syrian crisis, and he said that innocent Muslims and Christians are being slaughtered. Now, I don't care which one you mentioned first. I think innocent people are being slaughtered. I don't like to hear Christians or Muslims, or I don't like to hear innocent people are being slaughtered, period.
You think he even knew that line was in the speech until he read it off the teleprompter?
Well, hold on. Let me give credit where credit is due. He did say it, and he is the president.
I'll take it.
And he even said Muslims first, which, I mean, to me, that was noteworthy. And then he talked about our Muslim friends and allies around the globe, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall him ever saying that, ever. Now, I have no use for this man. I'm just asking the panel, I'm going to start with Zachy. Did you notice any of that? Does any of that give you even an iota of hope, or is that just empty talk because he's already talking about putting back his travel ban in place?
Well, yeah, I mean, actions speak louder than words. I mean, we've seen, his professed either ignorance, apathy, or antipathy towards Islam and Muslims for the past, however long since he's been speaking about the issue in public. And so, no, I mean, one phrase in a 90-minute speech is certainly not going to turn the tide for me. Absolutely not.
Would you let Van Jones know that, please? Because apparently Van Jones said he is now the president after that speech. Okay.
Well,
and I love Van.
I have to imagine that the point Van Jones is trying to make, and I don't have any insight into his mindset, but I have to imagine, just having heard him for so long, I think the point he was making is this is how it will be perceived rather than I perceive it this way.
Well, I don't know. I think that, to be honest, Riggs, I think what Van Jones was doing, there is an absolute fatigue. Obviously, it happens with the public, and it happens with just us. People are kind of political junkies and into this sort of a thing. I'm exhausted. I want anything to come out of him just to get me go like, okay, see, I'm not just like partisan nut. Like I want to have something like to be able to compliment him on, but it's so bad. I think that has to be what it was. It was almost like in his own mind building his own credibility.
Well, let me jump in here. So the speech itself, I watched it. My wife did not watch it because she didn't want to throw something at our TV, and nor did I want her to. But it demonstrates that he can come off as presidential and give an address like that. And I think that actually, from a political standpoint, does him a disservice, because now it demonstrates that when he flies off the handle and accuses, the previous administration from tapping Trump Tower, it doesn't mean that he isn't capable of being measured and deferential in reason. It means that he doesn't want to. And so I think that actually did him a disservice. And the other thing about this is that I think that there's a gauntlet laid down to Democrats. At some point, Democrats are going to have to love their country more than hating Trump. And here's why I say that, before you guys jump all over me, is that right now, the Democrat, messaging...
My Wolverine claws have already come out, so make it quick. Make it quick, sir. I'm in slash mode.
I'm 3 hours away, and I'll have dinner waiting for you when you get here. But everything is. Look how crazy Trump is. Look at his Twitter. Look how awful his cabinet is, and Jeff Sessions is recusing himself, and all of these stories. Is that at some point you're going to have to be for progressive policy and not just against Trump. And I think, maybe I'm Pollyanna, and if I am, then so be it. But
what you're saying is you're saying is 100% correct. And in different ways, Rick and I have been arguing about this offline. So that would almost feed into, are we getting off on Trump right now? Okay, I'll try to get off on Trump and then get back to religion.
Let's do this rant, and I want to get back to religion and
let me real quick. Let me answer the question about the line in speech about innocent Muslims and Christians being slaughtered. It goes back to what we were talking about, having a comprehensive view of being what it is to be pro-life, and viewing the life outside the womb as important as the life inside. And I'm with you guys. Rudy Giuliani, did the worst thing that you can do in politics. He got caught telling the truth in front of a microphone. He got approached about doing a Muslim ban and tapped these 7 Muslim countries. And so what guys like me, and like I said, not to make this the Alan Cross, promotion hour or something like that, but the guys at the Evangelical Immigration
Hey, Philip, feel free because I forgot to ask you for your plug, so go ahead and get it in.
I'll do it at the end because I don't want to bury speeches and Muslim bans at this point. But what I'm saying is that the fastest growing area of the world of people turning to Christianity are these places of chaos, such as Iran. Iran is the fastest growing area of people turning to Christianity. So when I see this, we're just doing carte blanche banning of these 7 countries, including Iran. For me, as an evangelical, I see it as, first of all, it fails by policy. Second of all, it fails by its stated goals because it's Christmas morning for ISIS as far as recruitment's concerned, because they finally get the war with the West that they've been craving for. But third, as Christians, as a pastor and as evangelicals, we are shutting the door on our brothers and sisters. And Scripture's clear in Matthew where where Jesus is talking about I was naked and you clothed me, I was fed, I was hungry and you fed me, and I was in jail and you persecuted me. If you want me to get off on some level of tangent, what I'm going to tell you is that for the guys like Robert Jeffress, like Jack Graham, like Jerry Falwell, who are advocating for this Muslim ban,
have they read the Bible?
Well, but
is that your question?
No. I fully believe that they're putting their nationalistic and dominionistic influences over the concepts of Christ, and I think that when Judgment Day comes, Jesus is going to look at them and say, "I was fleeing terrorists and running from war-torn countries, and you shut the door in my face." And my prayer for them isn't necessarily that I'm pointing bony finger, is that I pray that they repent, and I pray that Jesus gets a hold of their lives and says, not only are you not serving your own nationalistic interests, you're not serving, and to me what is greater, the kingdom very well on that.
So what you're confirming is a thing that I think, at this point, that is the way that I see it. I think you kind of nailed it. They have, no matter where you feel spiritually, it feels as evangelicals, they don't even know it, but they have abandoned the Bible, and they have moved into their religion is conservative American values, right? They don't know it. They'll argue all these cases that are in contradiction of the Holy Book. Yet, across the board, that is the faith. I'm not saying that the Bible's not there, but the Bible's the kicker on the back end. There's no way that they take all these positions towards poor people, towards refugees, towards how we treat our planet, and then still make the same argument. No, it's the Bible that comes first, because they're ignoring those things, as you just said.
I would push back only that it's across the board. He actually prayed at the DNC benediction. It was Tony Campolo.
I need policy. I like that. That is something. I'm not taking that away, but I need policy. I need things that actually impact human lives. That's what I consider to be the difference.
Okay, so
so the evangelical immigration table is not policy driven.
Sorry, I'm not following. I'm not quite clear on what
you're asking for policy, and I'm presenting you an organization that is neck deep in advocating for policy, going as far as sitting with state and federal legislators and senators. And so you're asking for policy.
If that's happening, I'm happy to be educated about it if that's a movement in the right direction. But the difference would be, is that a small faction, or is that something like, is that something bigger? Is that like the majority, or is that like maybe a foundation of something hopefully that will grow and come forward?
And let's take this up. Go ahead and finish that thought, Philip, please.
What I think, my goal on coming onto the show is understanding who you guys are, and I love you guys. I mean, we've known each other for a long time. Is that it is easy to paint in broad brush and say, you said across the board. Well, it's not across the board, and change takes time, and change like this of shifting a nationalistic focus to a more kingdom-minded focus, and using our responsibility as believers to be advocates for the least of these.
Why is it when you say paint with a broad brush, I can picture Zachy right now, a little tear going down his face as a Muslim in America?
You know what? I want to talk about that right there. I'm stopping. This conversation's great. I didn't want to interrupt it, but I do have to interrupt it right now. So let's actually pick up on what you just said, Michael, because I want to talk about Bill Maher for a second. And I know that some people on this panel may have just cringed a little bit. Zachy, I know that you're not a fan. Philip, I'm assuming you're not either. I have a love-hate relationship with Bill Maher. I understand, as a person who is a pastor, is a Muslim, and I'm not a religious person, by the way. My religious beliefs are my own, and that's just kind of how I'm wired. I am an open book on everything in the world except kind of my religious beliefs. I don't know what it is about that, but it's just a private thing. But I'll say this. I am not for organized religion on any level, for me personally. And I look at someone like Bill Maher, who has made some valid points about religion. Now, he's also made some horrific points about religion. I think that he's a condescending asshole when it comes to Christianity. I think that when there's a terrorist attack and he tweets the Islam, the religion of peace, strikes again, that infuriates me to no end. But both do, by the way, okay? Now, with that said, he has made some points in terms of what it means to be a liberal. And if we are able to ditch the core values of liberalism because we're being politically correct about a certain religion, I think there is some valid points. Now, and we can go through some of those. Let's just say, for instance, when he's talking about Islam, and he says that, if you are for a woman being forced to cover her face in certain countries, that is not what it means to be a liberal. And quite frankly, I agree with that. And if you're anti-gay and think that gays have no purpose on this planet, again, that goes against the core of liberalism. Whether that's a Muslim man or a Christian man or whoever is doing that, doesn't matter. So I guess for everybody on this panel, and Zachy, I'll just ask you first. And it's not I don't want to have a conversation necessarily about Bill Maher, but feel free to comment any way you want to. I'm just trying to get you to react to that notion of you juxtapose liberalism with things that go against liberalism that are in the confines of religion. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? How do you?
I think so.
How do you reconcile that when you hear what it means to be a liberal, and so many things about certain religions can go against that? What are your thoughts on that, generally speaking?
Well, I mean, the problem of Bill Maher's perspective is that his implicit notion is that one cannot be liberal while at the same time supporting the rights of Muslims. And what that does is it essentially looks at, in a blinkered fashion, and rejects the idea that you can have conservative Muslims and liberal Muslims, and it's a wide spectrum. And
you certainly can, and obviously he's talking about third world countries that he's referring to primarily.
Well, right, but even those quote unquote third world countries are not monolithic, and so he presents the thing about Bill Maher that I find irksome is, first of all, there are many things he says that I think are on point, and I've even said as much. I will repeatedly say that, I agree with him on this point. However, I think his view of religion in general is there's a cruelty to it that I find troubling. Where, if you watch this movie Religulous, it's not like I don't believe, because, you're entitled to not believe. But what you're not entitled to do is be a conceited jackass to people who do believe, because, that's something that's important to them, and it gives them value. You used the phrase broad brush earlier. That's what he does. He uses a broad brush.
He does oftentimes. He does it. I don't like that.
However, his broad brush has a slightly broader edge when it comes to Islam. I hate all religions, but Islam is the worst of a bunch of equally bad things. That's his. I'm paraphrasing badly, and I'm sure he would push back.
You're barely paraphrasing. That is him for sure. And Batman would agree with us, by the way. Ben Affleck was on his panel on that very conversation.
Right. And here's something interesting about when I think about Ben Affleck on the panel of that show, what I think about is the fact that Ben Affleck's personal trainer is a guy named Rehan Jalali. Mm-hmm. And Rehan Jalali is somebody I know. He's a good friend of my co-host on my other show, Diffuse Congruence. He's a personal trainer. He's a practicing Muslim. He fasts. He does everything. And you know what? He's a trainer to the stars. He's a trainer to Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, he's the real deal. And I could not help but think of Rehan when Ben Affleck was on there pushing back on Sam Harris. And this circles back to what I was saying earlier. It's easy to speak in abstractions when you don't have an actual personal experience with somebody who shows himself as a person. Oh, and by the way, they happen to be Muslim. That's not to say Bill Maher doesn't know people like that, because of course he does. But the point I'm making is that Islam, like any religion, is a religion of multitudes. It's impossible to look at it monolithically, and I would say the same about Christianity or Judaism or anything else, because people are not monolithic, And so this is why it's so infuriating to see Bill Maher kind of sitting here and speak in these very broad generalities about things he does not know about in any first-hand way. He knows about them in an abstract sense from reading articles, reading statistics. He cites this.
Well, he was in Catholic school when he was 4.
Okay, well, there you go.
And I'm being facetious. I mean, he does say that.
Zach, are you about to cite like the stat where he's talking about statistically overseas about how many Muslims in the Middle East or whatever country think that you should be put to death for leaving the religion? Is that what you're about? Yeah.
That's right. And we don't know. There's so many questions. I have more questions than answers about that poll, And it's like, X% of Muslims believe in Sharia law. Oh, my God. Well, okay, let's have a conversation about what Sharia law is and what it means for certain people. You know what I mean? If you ask me, I believe in Sharia law. What does that mean?
Right.
Let's have a conversation about that. I mean, this is the point I'm making, right? Because these are nuances that are being filtered out, and it's not helpful when you have somebody like Bill Maher, who on one hand is advocating for nuance, and we need to be more sophisticated in this and that, and yet he has this massive blind spot where he's willing to just write off adherence to, we're talking about 1.8 billion Muslims all over the world. He's writing them off. He's writing them off and saying, if you're not a terrorist, or if you don't have these problematic thoughts, well, you're just doing it wrong. That's Bill Maher's view.
Zach, can I ask you a question? Because I think and I almost think we need to take this topic to another one, like all the questions that people have. I think you're right. It's a complete misunderstanding of Islam and the faith across the world. Let me tell you something as a progressive, and even as the way that I stand, kind of my perspective when it comes to religion in America, hell, anywhere in the world, is leave people alone. Quit cornering people, quit attacking them, right? You should be allowed to live your life and with your faith as long as it is not hurting others, right? It's not abusive to yourself or your family. Leave people alone. They're just trying to get through their normal day, and it drives me absolutely bonkers to target people.
My philosophy in life, your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. That's what it comes down to for me, just like that. As a way to live.
Here's having put that out there. Here's something. I'm not a Muslim. There are things that I could say that we definitely need to have a conversation. And if I'm wrong about it, I want to know. But when I do hear things about the Middle East, and it shows what happens when there's too much religion inserted into government. You can see all the different layers of it when it gets almost as bad in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and women having to, as Bill Maher says, walk around in beekeeper outfits. But one thing as an American, that I will admittedly say that does get under my skin when I do see, obviously, a Muslim family out in public is it'll, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah. I'll see a Muslim man, he'll be wearing flip-flops and shorts and a T-shirt. It'll be here down in Texas, it's 105 degrees out. He's fine, and so are the other boy kids walking around. And he'll have his wife that'll be head to toe wrapped up and out in the heat. And I say to myself, and I don't know if this is just maybe just being ignorant, but I say to myself, if somebody's got to cover up, she's got to cover up to that sort of extreme, then you need to cover up. Like, you're making a woman, whether even if you say that she chose to be that way, she's now socially pushed into, covering up, and the man's just relaxed and he's out like comfortable because that's the way it's some sort of long time tradition being carried forward. So if I feel that way, obviously it's way more extreme with the conservatives the people at least that hate the idea of Muslims. So my question is, what is your reaction to that, and why is my perception right or wrong?
That's a really good question. What I will say as far as women covering, look, I mean, my personal perspective, and this is as a Muslim, is, look, ultimately it's a woman's choice whether she chooses to cover or not, and the degree to which she covers. My understanding has always been that it's wear looser clothing that is modest and cover your hair. So as far as the quote unquote beekeeper outfits, I mean that's a cultural affectation. It's not a requirement of the religion. Now that being said, there's a wide spectrum. There were some people interpret it in a much more beekeeperish fashion than others.
But women on a
personal level, I disagree with that. I want to. Sorry, just before you interject.
Sure, go ahead.
On a personal level, I do disagree with that, and I literally just a week ago I had this conversation with my wife where I was like, it seems like a little much to me personally. Now, my wife, she wears a scarf, and I have, and she's worn it since before we met. I didn't see her hair until after we got married.
Wow.
And I told her, I said, if you chose to take it off tomorrow, if that's your choice, I'll support you. It's her decision is my point. And she comes from a family where, her sister doesn't wear the scarf.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's really important to...
And that's the ideal setup that I'm talking about. That is what I'm talking about. There's no social pressure or anything on you, but
that's right.
Yeah,
I've
never been offended by a woman wearing a scarf. Not a Muslim woman, not a nun.
Yeah, the scarf.
Nobody.
That's
right.
not.
That's nothing.
It's when you.
And to your point, Michael, this is not to say that this is not. I'm not naive enough to say that there aren't parts of the world where women are not forced to wear this. I'm aware of that, and it's deeply problematic. I'm never going to defend that because I think you can't force faith on people.
Right.
And if that's the intent, I think whenever you have a situation where you have a patriarchal system sort of forcing faith-based behavior, well, all you're doing is ensuring that people will have a negative association between that faith and their own praxis. So it's a self-defeating goal at the end of the day. And I lived in Saudi Arabia. I saw this firsthand.
Right.
You lived there for what, Zachy? 9 years, 10 years?
Yeah, just about 9 years. Yeah, and you have religious police over there.
And people are hiding out, and whether drinking or things like that, because that is the overall example. Although we've gone in all these different directions from it, and just to kind of circle back is I like what you say, right? It's a good point, and if it's that way, your wife, and she's made that choice, then damn right, leave her alone, and she should be able to do it. But when you put too much. We can even go back to Philip on this. This is the concern, is that you see what happens in the United States when we're very, we're pretty much a secular country, and we have certain laws and the Constitution built in place to keep religion at bay, that somebody like Zachy and his wife can live peacefully here, hopefully peacefully, and people of every single faith can be here to pray and live as they please. But once you take it to some other extreme, in certain Middle Eastern countries, they have too much of the church, of the mosque that's inserted into it, and then you see that's when the faith can be abusive. Would you agree with my conclusion?
And that's so well said. And I want to transition to the last topic here. So I want to touch on this, and I say briefly. It's almost impossible to touch on any of this briefly, but let's try, because I know we have families to get to and everything. I want to just talk about the role of religion in government, if it should exist, to what extent, and what we think about that. And again, that's loaded, but I want to start with Philip. Philip, I'm going to ask you just sort of a point-blank question, sir.
Point-blank question, because these have been so measured so far.
Is the United States of America a Christian nation?
Well, I mean, that's again, point-blank question. So treaties have the force and effect of law, and then the Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli would say that, no, it is not a Christian nation. But to your broader point, what is the role of faith and from my perspective, Christianity in the public square? And I think it does have a role as far as holding power accountable. So I remember in 2012, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the race between Obama and Romney. And it was a little bit hyperbolic in that it said that this is the ultimate test between which will hold sway, whether it be the public sector in governance or the private sector, business and things like that. And I read it and I pushed back and even tried to get an article picked up in the journal as a response, and it didn't pick up, but they did respond and said, yours was good, but not good enough kind of deal, is that it ignores a very important aspect of our life, because, we the people come, not compartmentalized. I don't have a public fill. I don't have a private fill. I don't have a fill at, work. I don't have a fill at in my pulpit. I just have what I am, and I bring all of my pains, privileges, and baggage with me. And so does our country, because we do have, a large segment of the population that engages in some kind of faith, and primarily a Christian, or at least nominally Christian perspective. And so the article that I wrote and tried to get picked up is that it ignores this idea of what I tabbed as the morality sector of people holding both the public and private sector accountable to their actions, because government is amoral. It is neither good nor bad. I mean, it is, and I know you guys being liberals will probably push back on me on that, but there is no intrinsic moral good in policy. There's no intrinsic moral good or bad in profit. So there has to be something in that identifies with the intrinsic moral good.
There's a yin to every yang, is what you're saying.
I would agree. Listen, I've always said that laws and morals are mutually exclusive.
So there has to be something that says, perhaps, since it is, pertinent to this conversation we've had, perhaps the Muslim ban, maybe not so much in, defending and representing and protecting what we find valuable and things like that. And that's where I think the faith community has a role to play. And where I think you get into issue, though, is that when one tries to encroach on the other. And just speaking from my perspective as a pastor and as a Christian, is that, when faith tries to encroach on governance and on the public sector, you use Ted Cruz, and there's an idea within Christianity, it's called dominionism, is that, the United States, is a Christian nation purportedly or not. When you start getting into that, then you start getting into the to the extreme that we talked about with Zaki, the religious police, that you have issues and that you're held civically liable. And then if you have, if Christianity encroaches on the private sector and chases after the profit motive, you have Joel Osteen and the prosperity gospel, and that is straight up heresy. And so, getting back to your overall question, does faith have a role in the public square? Yes, it does, but it has to be very careful, especially as Jesus people, to stay in its lane and not try to chase the siren song of the chair or political power or the Oval Office or whatever it is, because then it's tainted. From my pulpit, I've said that a gospel that is tainted with either the profit motive or with the motive of political power is no gospel at all.
Philip, could you ever vote for an atheist for president of the United States?
Sure.
Yeah, most of the congregation just did. No, I'm kidding. He's an evangelical.
and there's no reason to ask Zachy if he could vote for a non-Muslim. Obviously, he's done it his whole life, other than Obama, of course.
Well, I was proud to vote for the first Muslim president. Don't tell anybody.
So what about, and again, this is going to be a loaded one, but I'm very proud of the panel. We actually controlled that. That's impressive. So, Philip, to you and Zachy both, what about religious teachings in public schools? And we can go as far as an extreme of talking about creatism as actual fact, or we can get into just the history of religion, which a lot of people will freak out if the word Islam is even mentioned in their classroom. I'm talking about overzealous parents that are obviously Islamophobic. My question, though, is where should we draw the line in terms of how we are teaching our children in public schools? Is there a role for religion to be played outside of just the history of religion as a history lesson, so to speak? Zachy?
Well, I personally feel like the role of faith in a belief capacity should be taught in the home by parents. I think in school the historical context of religions should be taught, and I'm somebody who I've benefited greatly from learning about world religions, and this we see it all the time. There's this pushback towards even learning about Islam. Like, oh my God, it's indoctrinating my kids. It's like, no, it's knowledge. I'm a Muslim. I learned about Christianity growing up. I'm not Christian because of it, but I have a great deal of respect for the history of the religion and for the people who believe in it. And isn't that the role of school? It's to give you an expansive knowledge of the world and not just the stuff that you already know about. And certainly, as a parent, for me, that's not something I've ever shied away from or would shy away from. My kids go to school during the day, and then afterwards, my mom teaches them Quran, and they're learning how to read Arabic and this and that, and that's their religious education.
When you said, isn't that the role of public schools, that was so well said. So well said.
Well, thank you.
Well, listen, guys, this has been such a great conversation, and quite frankly, I could talk for hours and hours and hours.
I'd like to weigh on that last question. I mean,
please, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with Zachy to an extent. I mean, is that as far as a historical context and breadth of knowledge? Yeah, I mean, I learned about just like you guys of world religions, and I think I'm the better for it. I think there's two things from my perspective that one I'd advocate for, and then one I would push back on. And first is the creationism story. Gospel-believing scientists and geologists and people who believe in the scientific method who are, old earthers, so to speak, that don't believe that the earth is 6,000 years old, who would also hold to the creation story. And so in the interest of expanding knowledge and presenting alternate theories to the existence of creation, I would say that talking about the creation story has value and has benefit. And then the other is, it might surprise you, is the idea of prayer in school. Is that I'm actually, and this is where I line up with Zachy, is that as far as religious education is concerned, is that is my job as a pastor, but more so my job as a father to talk about what we believe and why we believe it. And that when Christians begin to talk about, well, no wonder the schools are in such a way because we kicked God out of it. The two things I push back is, well, my God's pretty big, and I don't think a district superintendent can necessarily push him out. And the second is that there's this idea of false piety in the school when a prayer is offered or something like that by a student or a principal or a teacher, especially if that person doesn't necessarily share in my belief structure. And so I would advocate, that is something that goes beyond just cultural exposure and into actual proselytizing.
So for the sake of time, I'm going to have to end it there. It was well said. I'm going to push back and say this, though, on one aspect of that, is that I don't think creatism has any place in public schools personally. But let's end it there. And Philip, since I kind of cheated you out of a plug, even though you were crafty to get some in, give us a quick plug.
Sure. Well, as I said, and Rick mentioned on the outset, I do have a show that I co-host with my good friend and another pastor. His name is Ryan Abernathy. It's Ryan and Philip's Conversation Rules. You can find it on 91online.com. We air it live between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., but then we carry all of our shows. You can find the podcast on iTunes, and then you can go to roundtablemediagroup.com, and that's where it's streaming online. And then the other part of my life, outside of being father, pastor, podcaster, banker, I'm also an author. And if you go to philiplarsen.com, that's where I have all of my anthology of books, and then my new one will be released, I'm hoping this month, but we'll see on that. And philiplarsen.com has 2 L's in Philip and an E at the end on Larsen.
Zachy, is there anything else you want to plug that I won't step on your feet this time to do it?
Well, you can find me online at ZachysCorner.com. That's ZAKIS Corner, and that's also my Twitter handle. So if you're interested in following along with based on whatever I said today, I have to say in my defense, I'm kind of hopped up on Robitussin right now. So if I don't know anything I just said, so I hope it sounded okay.
You were fantastic as always, sir.
In that case, more Robitussin before my next.
Yay, more Robitussin. So, and listen, if anybody listening is a fan of Star Wars, I know this sounds kind of crazy. It's a pop culture thing. Please Google Batman on Film Star Wars podcast. We have 2. Zachy is my permanent Star Wars co-host, panelist, and they're a lot of fun, and we're going to be doing one pretty soon after the next trailer comes out, which I guess will be at the Orlando Star Wars Celebration next month. So anyway, those are great shows if you like Star Wars.
I can't wait to discuss more Star Wars.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. All right, so let's end the show now with our famous predictions. Philip, do you have a prediction prepared, sir?
Yeah, I mean, my prediction is that as the days, months, weeks, and years progress, that the institutions that we love on the country as far as checks and balances will continue to be challenged, but they'll also continue to hold, and that the sky is indeed not falling as far or as fast as some would fear.
Michael Malloy, predictions.
By the summer of 2018, the country will realize that Donald Trump did not bring back the coal jobs and was not able to successfully bring all the jobs back to America, just like he didn't do at all his previous businesses because he's a terrible businessman, and that's another topic. So
that was McLaughlin-esque. I really like the way you sounded on that.
So what my prediction is, it's going to be about spring, summer 2018. His poll ratings will finally start to tank all over when the rest of America wakes up. It was all a ruse. And that is when the start of the impeachment proceedings start for his involvement and his collusion with Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. It's not a conspiracy. It happened. We will be proven right. Thank you.
All right. Prediction, Zachy.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Michael said, I think Russia is going to bring down this presidency, and I say that with certainty at this point.
I think in 2018, we're going to look back on Saturday Night Live's 2017, and we're going to say this is the funniest year since 1981. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Left Shoe Politics podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Left Shoe Politic, Facebook at facebook.com/Left Shoe Politics. Search for our channel on YouTube, and you can find us on the LSP website, leftshoepolitics.com.